Anyone who believes in indefinite growth on a physically finite planet is either mad or an economist.
We don't want to focus politics on a notion that involves the rejection of principles around which a large majority of our fellow citizens organize their lives.
We are not as endlessly manipulable and as predictable as you would think.
We have learned a lot in recent years from psychologists, behavioral economists, neuroscientists about how we make decisions, about what kinds of decisions we should make, about why we make decisions. We haven't learned that much about when. And I'd like to talk about timing and the question of when. Meanwhile, as we've learned all of this information, the crush of technology has been radically speeding up our lives. And we really need a role model to look to in dealing with this crush of technology. And so there she is. Maggie, balancing that treat precariously on her snout, showing us that she has the power to delay gratification, that she can procrastinate. And one of the things I'd like to try to do is to persuade you that procrastination has gotten a bad name, that in fact, really we should refer to it as delay management, that we would all be better off if we embraced procrastination given the crush of technology. So I'd like to start with my own childhood. One of the things that drew me to Right Weight was my own inveterate procrastination. This is an unmade bed. When I was a kid and went to elementary school, my mother asked me to make my bed before I would leave. I would argue with her and say, why should I make my bed? I'm just going to sleep in it later on. This would be a waste of time. She'd say, well, we have company coming over later, and that seemed implausible to me, so I said, okay, I'll wait until after school and try to verify that claim. She would say, they're coming over at 7 o'clock, and I would say, all right, well, I'll wait for hard evidence. I want to see a car in the driveway. I'd like to see hear a knock at the door. This sort of two-step decision-making process that I learned in elementary school is something that I'm going to try to argue fits all aspects of our decisions. Step one is think about what the greatest amount of time you could delay before taking an action or making a decision is. And then step two, wait until the last possible moment in that time frame. Step one is figure out what time world you're living in. Step two is procrastinate. I want to argue that that is a recipe for happiness and success. Here's today. It's a very simple two-step model. I learned it as an 8-year-old. We look into the future. We figure out when the last second is, and then we decide and act. The way I want to frame my argument is by starting with very, very fast decisions or reactions and then telescoping out to much longer-term ones. So I want to start with the world of milliseconds and then move out to seconds, minutes, months, and ultimately years. Jimmy Connors here, depicted about to return a serve. Why was he so good, or Novak today, the great tennis returners, why are they so good at returning a serve? And the standard wisdom about why they're so good was that they're so fast. I want to argue that they're so good because they're so slow. What's the longest amount of time we can act until we act? 500 milliseconds. A tennis court, baseline to baseline is 78 feet. Serves are coming in at over 100 miles an hour. You have about 450 milliseconds to return one of these serves. We'll call it 500 just to round off. So you have this block of time, 500 milliseconds. How do you optimally use that amount of time if you're about to return a serve? Well, we can break it into pieces. The first is visual reaction time. If all of us were simply asked to, from our seats, push a button when the serve, when we can see the serve, our visual reaction time, if we don't even have to get off the sofa, all we have to do is react visually, takes all of us about 200 milliseconds, give or take a few. That gives us 300 milliseconds to hit the ball. Now, I don't know about you, but in 300 milliseconds, I can't do very much with a tennis racket. I certainly can't extend it with the power and accuracy necessary to return a professional serve at Wimbledon. However, Jimmy Connors could. He could compress his hit time, and the best professionals can compress their hit time to be in the range of 50 to 100 milliseconds. And I'm not just making this up. Peter McLeod at Oxford and others have studied superfast professional sports, including baseball, cricket, tennis, and it's all the same. Professionals are able to compress their hitting action to make it much quicker than amateurs. And the difference is essentially about 50 milliseconds. So they free up this extra time in between. And what do they do with the extra time in between? They observe, they prepare, they take in information about the speed, flight, and trajectory of the ball. The advantage that they get is from going slow. They are able to go fast at the very end in order to act at the last possible minute and free up all of this time to gather information that amateurs are not able to gather. See, prepare, and then hit. And notice, same model. Looks exactly the same as me making my bed. The same kind of decision-making framework also occurs in a very different, much stranger world, the world of high-frequency trading. About 70% of stock trades now are done by computer algorithms at very high speeds. I, in the course of my research, found a company called UNX that is a high-frequency, execution-only trading firm. And UNX had problems. It was at the very bottom of the league tables. And they needed new blood to lead the company. And they went out and found a Renaissance man, Scott Harrison. They brought him in to redo their computer algorithms. 2 blocks east of Interstate 5, flip the switch, and UNX rockets to the top of the league tables. They become one of the best performing high-frequency firms in the world. The engineers come in and they say, you know what, we could do even better if we were faster. What if we co-located to the New York Stock Exchange? They pack up all the computers and they move them to Manhattan, thinking that they'll save some time because even at the speed of light, it takes about 35 milliseconds for the signal to travel from Burbank to New York. When they switch the computers on in New York, they go back to the bottom of the league tables. No one can figure out why. They run every test. Fortunately, the Renaissance man, Scott Harrison, says, you know what, let's try slowing down those computers. Let's slow them down from 35 or 30 milliseconds to 65 milliseconds. And guess what happens? They go back up to the top of the league tables. And the explanation is that sometimes being the first mouse, if there are dangerous cats out there, is not the way to go. Sometimes the second mouse gets the cheese. Sometimes there's a first mover disadvantage. That what was happening in this high-speed algorithmic world of computers was that computers were battling each other viciously at the time speed of the first 35 milliseconds, and that avoiding that battle and waiting a few extra milliseconds actually was a superior decision-making framework. This idea of managing latency or delay, another word for delay, comes up in all aspects of business. In telecommunications, where the amount of delay that our ears can handle is about 150 milliseconds. The telephone companies have decided that they don't need to pay to minimize the amount of delay. 150 milliseconds of delay is just fine, and it wouldn't be worth it, and so let's just wait until the last possible moment, again, within that rubric, go out to 150 milliseconds. Now I want to telescope out to slightly longer-term decisions and show you that the same, again, we could pejoratively label it procrastination. I like to say managing delay. But that the same phenomenon occurs at slower speeds. In the Clinton administration, Fred Thompson, in the morning, accused President Clinton of being involved in a kickback scheme involving political contributions and the Teamsters. He was wrong. He quickly learned that he was wrong. The evidence grew throughout the day. He had an opportunity to apologize right away and said, no, I'm not going to apologize right away. I'm going to delay. He procrastinated his apology. It eventually was all out. At the end of the day, 6 hours later, he said, okay, now I'll apologize. He went on the television and said, I'm sorry, I was wrong. Research on apologies shows that in this world of seconds, minutes, hours, that the most effective apologies are delayed as long as possible. Very counterintuitive. We're taught as kids to say you're sorry right away. And in fact, sometimes if you accidentally spill a drink on someone at a party, you should apologize right away because there's no intentionality, it's not a complex act. But for more complex acts, if we've wronged our spouses or someone at work, in fact, we want to delay our apology for as long as possible for 2 reasons. One is that if we delay our apology, we enable the aggrieved party to accumulate information about what exactly it is that we did, why, what specifically happened during that period of time. And second, we give them time to vent. We give them time to express their anger, their emotions, so that when we finally apologize, it's a more meaningful apology. It takes into account their emotions, and it takes into account all of this additional information.